All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Walls, and I'm here with Tom Peterson. And today he's going to be talking about TCP reassembly and how it can get a little complicated, and it's and how it can end up. It's reassembled different ways in different operating systems, and how that can actually be used in some cases to hide malicious attacks, or also make analyzing it sort of difficult. Tom gave this talk at SharkFest US 2019, and you can actually catch his talk and a lot of the other ones in their retrospective. That was about 2 weeks ago. So before I hand things over to him, we are using GoToWebinar for this webinar. So if you have any questions, which we'll take at the end, you can type them into the question box of your GoToWebinar control panel, and we will get to them at the end. So what are we going to talk about today here? We're going to talk about what stream reassembly is and what it means, and also why it exists, what its purpose is in TCP, and a little bit about how TCP works and why it's so critical to the way that networking works. We're going to get into how reassembly works and some of the ways that we can analyze it using packet captures and why that might be difficult based on the way that different systems handle it. And then last, we're going to go through and sort of see if there's any particular issues that can arise because of the way that reassembly is done and done differently by different tools. So without further ado, I will hand things over to Tom.
Hi everybody, this is Tom. I'm here from CloudShark. So Jason mentioned that I gave this presentation at SharkFest this year. That was a goal of mine. So I needed a topic, and I spent a good part of last year just investigating TCP stream reassembly, taking a look at how it works, how it's analyzed, to learn more about it myself. And here I am to share with you what I learned. So to start, TCP is part of the TCP IP suite. So that's used to send messages over the internet. Just for a little history and perspective, it's RFC number 793. That was published in 1981. So it's been around for a long time. It's been a part of the internet kind of since the beginning. So this isn't new. This isn't a new protocol. And we need TCP because IP networks are unreliable. So what that means is, as you're sending and receiving packets, you can receive those in a different order that the sender sent them. Packets can be dropped at any time. I've never actually seen one of these in the wild, but apparently they can be duplicated too. So we need TCP to deliver this data reliably over an unreliable network. So when TCP starts up, this is kind of a talk about how it accomplishes this. It starts up with a three-way handshake. So this is both the sender and receiver just sending us some information before they can actually start sending data. And this is kind of what I knew about TCP from the beginning when I started this. I knew that the ACK, that stands for acknowledgement. SYN, I actually never really thought about what that means. As far as the name of the flag, always just those three letters. So to keep track of which bytes are sent and in what order they should be reassembled, there's a sequence number, which tells you the number of the number of the byte that the data is. There's also an acknowledgement number, which is the receiver uses that to say what bytes it has received and what it's expecting next. So to investigate this, let's play with the packets. So what I mean by that, to do this, I set up a couple computers here in our lab and then used a tool called SCAPI to kind of learn by doing. So this is a packet manipulation tool. It's written in Python. With it, we can create lovingly handcrafted artisanal packets. So what that means, we can send basically whatever we want. It's not really what a device would ever send itself. But we can use that to kind of, send packets to a device and see, investigate by creating these packets ourselves to see what happens. So I use that on the sender side to send these packets. And then as a receiver, I used a tool called Netcat. What that will do is it will just listen and print what data has been received. So it'll print it out in the order that the machine, the operating system, reassembles it and sends it back up to an application. So start with just a real quick example. We're going to send some data from a client, just the text hello from a client and from the server. And let's take a look at one of the packet captures that we created with Scapy here. So here's the first example. So we've got a really basic kind of start here. Just clean these up a little bit. All right. So let me make that a little bigger. There we go. So here we've got our three-way handshake. So here you can see these flags. This S is the SYN, SYN-ACK, and ACK. So this is our three-way handshake here. Let's dive into this a little bit. So taking a look at the TCP header. Here we can see we're sending the flags. So this indicates that it's a SYN packet. We've got that set. This is to initiate a connection over TCP. Here we've also got our sequence number. So this is a randomly chosen number. And this is going to be where we're sending the first byte. It's going to have this sequence number. Since we're not sending any data in this packet, the next sequence number is the same as the initial sequence number there. So the receiver of that packet is going to send back the second packet of the three-way handshake. So this is the SYN, and the ACK flag is set on this one. And here the receiver has got the second host here is going to choose its own sequence number randomly. So this is where a data sent from it will start, the first byte there. The acknowledgement number here is actually the sequence number that the first host sent, incremented by 1. You always acknowledge the SYN flags in the three-way handshake. So to finish off the three-way handshake, we've got host A sending its sequence number. Since it did send a SYN flag, that's incremented by 1 there. And it also sets the acknowledgement number equal to the sequence that the second host sent. And so from there, we've completed the three-way handshake. Now we can start sending data. So let's take a look at this first packet here. So we've got our sequence number. In the data, we've got the text hello with the new line character. So this packet is 6 bytes long, starting at this sequence number. And we've sent this data. So the receiver of that is going to acknowledge it. So here we can see the ACK is set to that sequence number plus the 6 bytes that it received. And now we can continue sending data. So now we're going to send the text from and a new line. So we're starting at that sequence number plus the 6 bytes that we already sent. And here we've got 5 bytes, 1 byte for each character. And the receiver is going to acknowledge that. So now it's setting its ACK number to the sequence number from before, plus 5. So we've got 5962 there. And that just keeps, that whole process keeps going. So here we've got the text client with the next sequence number, 7 bytes of data, and we're acknowledging that as well. And here, we've got this going in the other direction as well. So if you want to take a look at this capture and do all the math out, you can feel free. This math is a little difficult to do here with these large numbers. I'm not a huge fan of doing math like that. So there's got to be a better way than, adding up these huge numbers. And there is. So here's another capture. And if we take a look at this one, here we've got, sequence number 0 as the initial sequence number. So when we ACK that, we just get 1. So that math is already a lot easier. And we've got the sequence number that the receiver sent to 0. So again, now we're adding just 1. when we start to send data, we're sending, that initial sequence number of 6 bytes. So now we know the ACK number is 7. So it's much easier. But these sequence numbers are chosen randomly, and there's no way, odds are there's no way both of these devices actually chose 0 as their initial sequence number. And if we take a look down in the TCP header here we've got a sequence number 0, but now we've got this text next to it, relative sequence number. And if we click on this, we can actually look at the bytes in the packet. That's certainly not 0. So what this is relative sequence numbers. I think this is on by default in CloudShark and Wireshark. We can actually take a look at the preference here. Actually, we can't take a look at that yet. Let me see if I can find an example with that preference. I need to log in. There we go. So here we can look at the protocol preferences that we have configured, and here we do have TCP relative sequence numbers, and that's set to true. So that's going to make the TCP dissector kind of abstract that out for you. It'll pretend like both endpoints chose 0 to make that math easier for someone analyzing the capture. But if you're just basing, what's being sent on this sequence number up here, it's not really what was sent on the wire. So that is just something to be aware of. The devices aren't really choosing 0. They're starting with those random values. So that was a look at it from the packet capture. I've also got some animations here to kind of describe what's being sent and reassembled. So here we've got that hello packet. We've got the first byte set to 1. That was length 5, so the new line ends at 6. And down at the bottom, that's the receiver of this data's buffer, where it's reassembling these packets that was sent. So here we can see, it just fits right in, starting from 1 to 6. And then the second packet that we send from, the receiver is going to take that and put it in spot 7. And that last packet client, starts at byte 12, so that's going to go into the 12th spot in its buffer. And now it's reassembled that data as hello from client. So that sequence number in the three-way handshake, actually did find out, I think someone here told me, it stands for synchronize. So we're synchronizing those numbers so that both endpoints know what numbers should be sent as the sequence numbers. They're chosen randomly. That's why you have to synchronize them over that three-way handshake. And then each byte can be numbered. The sender is going to acknowledge which bytes it has received. And with that, we can detect, duplicates. If I send the same bytes twice, we've got that number, so I can discard any duplicates. If I've got any packets that show up in the wrong order, the receiver can actually reorder them and put them in the correct spot. We can also detect any bytes that the receiver is missing. The receiver isn't going to acknowledge anything it hasn't received, so the sender can compensate for that and resend any packets that may have been dropped. So let's take a look at how that would work if packets were received out of order. So again, we've got the buffer that is going to be where we're reassembling the TCP stream down at the bottom. And here we've got, say this was the first packet we received of, with sequence number 19 and 2 bytes of data. The receiver can actually take that and put it in the correct spot in its buffer. So that's spot 19. And as we keep receiving packets, we can just keep putting them in the correct spot. So when the sender meant to send the text packets received out of order, the receiver, even if it gets them in the completely wrong order, can put them in the correct spot and end up with the same message that was transmitted or intended to be transmitted. So let's take another look at a packet capture of this. So here again, up top, we've got our three-way handshake. So this is synchronizing those sequence numbers. And using SCAPI, we were able to send these packets way out of order. Typically, you wouldn't see something like this, this out of order on a real network. But here we've got that first packet. So we're starting at sequence number 19. That's the first thing the receiver gets. and that's got 2 bytes of data. And if we look, it's the text of that we sent in the example before. So the receiver is going to, send a packet back. It's received 19 and 19 through bytes 19 through 20, but we're only going to acknowledge, this is the receiver here, 1. So we still haven't gotten anything past 1. So next we're going to send that second packet. So here finally is sequence number 1. We've got the text packets. So we've got 7 bytes of data. And now the receiver can say, okay, yep, I have 1 through 8. I still can't say anything about 19 through 20, but I do have 1 through 8. Then next we're going to send sequence 21, text order, so 5 bytes. The receiver still, I've only got up to 8 consecutive bytes. Next we're going to send 8 through 16. So if you remember, we're on 8 before, now we're finally receiving 8. Where you're getting the text received, so 8 bytes of data. Now we can acknowledge that we've got 1 through 16. We've got the first 16 bytes. And finally, to complete the whole thing, we're going to send, that sequence 16, 3 bytes of data out. So now 16 through 19. And now the receiver can acknowledge and say, yep, now I've got everything. I've got all the way through 26. So it's still holding on to these packets that we sent way out of order up top here. It held on to this 19 sequence number packet, held on to 21 as well, but waited until it received all the consecutive bytes to send its ACK. Actually, and here, just one more thing, we can actually take a look at output from Netcat and some more examples to see, what the receiver is actually processing. All right. So we do have that data all on the side here as well. You can do this analysis kind of, if we're looking at something way out of order, we can keep track in our heads kind of 19 through 21, 21 through 26, and reassemble this ourselves. But doing that would be really difficult. So there is actually another analysis tool here. If we wanted to see what message was sent, rather than going through and kind of piecing this together ourselves, we can use an analysis tool called follow stream. So what this is going to do is take a look at all of those TCP packets, put them in the right order, and now we can print out what was actually received over TCP. So we can see it reassembled all of those, put them in the correct order. Take a look at the hex here. We can actually see packet by packet, sequence 0. That's the index there. The text packets received and in another packet. So we can actually look at what was reassembled rather than trying to analyze that by hand. So thinking about that, we've already got 2 really nice tools to help us with TCP. We have those relative sequence numbers, follow stream, which makes it really easy to figure out what's going on. That would be a nightmare to try to do by hand, especially with not just kind of a canned example like that. So that's kind of where I started my exploration into this. Just being curious, how would it handle some edge cases, follow stream? It can't really know exactly how the operating system is reassembling these packets. And then are there any other tools out there that also reassemble TCP from a PCAP? And is there anything we can do to cause some trouble with TCP reassembly? So let's take a look at my first attempt at this. So overlap. So what happens if we overlap some of the same data? So by that, what I mean, we've got this receiver here. So we're going to send bytes 1 through 10 in our first packet. So it's going to put that right in spot 1 and keep track of that. And then using Scapy, we're going to send some packets that maybe shouldn't be sent. We're going to go back and resend bytes 6 through 10. And we're going to change what the data is. So we're going to change it from this ABC alphabet characters. We're going to change it to all X's. So when the receiver receives this, it's what's going to win out in those spots? What is it going to process and hold on to? In this example, what gets reassembled is the data that was sent first. That wins kind of and goes in that spot. And we're going to end up with this stream being reassembled. So let's take a look at the packets for this one as well. So here we've got our three-way handshake. Here we've got the first packet that we're sending over TCP. So this is sequence number 1. We're sending A through J as characters down here. So we've sent 10 bytes. So our next sequence number should be 11. That would be the next byte that the receiver needs to get. You can see it's acknowledging the first 10 and setting its acknowledgement number to 11. And here we're sending that overlapping packet. So now we're going back and saying, all right, starting from byte 6, this is what I want to send. And I want to send X's there, where I sent different characters before. And if we look at this one, here we can see, I used netcat to kind of prove what the operating system would be reassembling from these strange packets. And in the comments here, we can see, we're listening on this TCP port, and this is what the application is going to receive. It's going to receive that data that was sent first. It's not going to process any of that overlapping data and change what it reassembles. So that's fairly expected. I would say that was what I was guessing. And then I tried retransmitting overlapping data. So we're going to overlap and retransmit data. So to describe this is the scenario here. In this first packet, we're not going to start with 1. We're going to start with 2. And we'll send, just our alphabet characters. So the receiver still can't say that it has any of these bytes. It hasn't received 1 yet. So now we're going to send a second packet, and this time we are going to send 1, but again, we're going to change what we sent last time. So in the second packet, we're sending X's where before we sent B, C, D. So what gets reassembled in that case? If we look at this example, the data that was sent second actually gets reassembled in there, which wasn't, based on the first example, wasn't what I was expecting. But let's take a look at the packets for that as well. So here we can see our three-way handshake. So we're on sequence number 1, and we're sending sequence number 2. So we still haven't actually transmitted the first byte yet, but we're sending B through T. So as I mentioned, the receiver can't acknowledge that it received those packets yet, because it doesn't have 1. It's got a spot missing. And then right after, we're going to send sequence number 1, so that first byte A, which it hasn't received yet, and we're changing what we sent before as bytes 2 through 10. I think I have it in this one too. So here, just looking at the comments, again, using netcat, listening on that port just to verify what the operating system is actually reassembling. And it is taking that data that was sent second in this case. So continuing this investigation, when I set this up in the lab, I was doing this all with Linux operating systems, CentOS 7. So using netcat, I was able to verify what the OS reassembled in that case, which was Linux OS. So with Windows, I tried this again just to verify. Tried this with Windows 10. So again, we sent bytes 2 through 20. And then after that, we're sending 1 through 10, changing what we sent. And what gets reassembled in this case is actually the opposite. So here we can see it's actually keeping those bytes that were sent initially, and it's not overlapping that data. It's not processing what was received second. So let's take a look at our tools again here. And this packet capture. So this is the same data being sent, just with 2 different operating systems. So we've got that, TCP reassembly tool within CloudShark and Wireshark, and if both operating systems do it different ways, what would this show? So these tools actually show the way Linux reassembles it, not the way that Windows does. So using a tool like FollowStream here, without knowing what operating systems are actually receiving these packets, there's no way for a tool like this to know how packets are being processed. Packet capture can show you exactly what was sent, exactly what packets were sent, but it can't know anything about, how they were actually processed as they get received. So that's definitely kind of a case where our tools are maybe not showing us exactly what's happening. So I actually did take a look at a few different operating systems here. So we've got Windows Vista and Windows 10. Both reassemble those packets as A through T, keeping the data that was sent in the first packet. And CentOS 7, FreeBSD, really interestingly, Windows XP and Mac OS all keep the data that was sent second. So I'm not sure why I switched from Windows XP to Windows Vista, but it's not even the same across one vendor. Even they don't agree how it should be done. So kind of the takeaway from that, as we said, the packets never lie. Those are the packets that were sent on the wire, but our tools, can't know how they were processed. So that follow stream doesn't really know exactly what's being received. So we still, we can use these tools. They can help us a lot, but it's still important to kind of know how these things are working and keep testing our tools. So then just thinking about, something we might be able to do with this. We've got an example here where we're going to try to use an HTTP directory traversal attack. So this is a fairly older style of attack, but essentially what you're trying to do is break out of the directory where the web server is sending back things like HTML files and images, and trying to get information you shouldn't be able to access. So using // as a typical Unix and Windows way to go a directory up. So I've got kind of an example here. I found an example Ruby web server, and I just kind of commented out the part that's supposed to protect against this kind of attack, and use this to do some testing. So here on the left side, you can see what the server's file system kind of looks like. So here we've got our root directory, we've got an etc folder and a password file that we're going to try to access. We've also got an HTML file that we're supposed to be serving. The web root is set to this var www directory, so that's where it's going to kind of by default start. And we're going to try to go 2 directories up and go into etc and get that password file. So to take a look at what this would look like just normally, here I've got a capture of doing this with that vulnerable web server. So here we've got our 3-way handshaking TCP, as always. And here's our HTTP request. So we're doing a get for /. This is actually a Unicode encoded /, just to kind of further muck things up. And then another .. /. So we've got our 2 directories up, and then going into etc and getting that password file. And if we take a look at follow stream here we can see, a little easier, that get request, and the response from the server says okay, and it sends back that password file. Yeah, most web servers aren't vulnerable to this anymore, but that's essentially the attack. We can actually also take a look at this using threat assessment. So this uses Suricata to find any kind of malicious traffic. And if we take a look at this, we can see we've got one high severity alert. If we take a look at this in our advanced analysis, here we can see it saying, okay, there was a directory traversal attempt. So something like threat assessment would pick this up and alert. We can take another look. And it's flagging exactly on that get. dot dot slash. That's why I had to add the Unicode actually, because the signature required the Unicode in there as well. So that's a basic description of an HTTP traversal attack. And let's take a look and do this with overlapping data. So we were going to try this against Windows 10, because we know Windows 10 keeps the data that was sent first. And let's take a look at a packet capture of this. So once again, three-way handshake. Here's that HTTP request, but we're starting with sequence number 2 here. So the data we're actually sending, look down below here, we're sending ET, because we need to fill in that G, that's at spot 1. So we're sending ET and the dot dot slash etc password, that's kind of our malicious payload right there. The receiver processes this and says, okay, I don't have byte 1 yet, so I'm only acknowledging 1. And then we're gonna send byte 1 to fill in that hole, but we're gonna change what we're sending in our GET request. We're gonna say, hey, we're getting totally not evil.html. And if we take a look at follow stream here, what it actually looks like we're seeing is the client making an HTTP request for something totally not evil or malicious, but the server's responding back with its etc password file. So that follow stream looks very strange, because we know follow stream is showing this as Linux would process it, not as Windows 10 would. And then if we take a look, if we remember, a threat assessment triggered on that payload, so we did still know, something bad happened. If you take a look at threat assessment in here we don't have any alerts. So it doesn't even look like anything malicious or bad was attempted. So Suricata is processing these packets as Linux would as well. So knowing this, if you know your adversary is running a web server on Windows, or running a server on Windows, and they're using Suricata, this would be a great way to hide from a tool like that. So after doing that and doing a little research, took a look at just other tools that reassemble TCP as well. So there's a tool out there, Network Miner, that also processes PCAPs, and you can get a lot of good data out of those. Network Miner shows for this stream getting the 2 directories up in the etc password file. Another tool, TCP Flow, is used to split the data sent over TCP in a PCAP into 2 separate files, so you can kind of look and see what was processed. That shows totally not doing anything evil.html. Suricata, as we saw, it shows get totally not doing anything evil. That's why it didn't trigger on that payload. It did look like, looking through their documentation, I found something called a host OS policy that looked like you could map certain IP addresses to certain operating systems. I couldn't get that to work for this case. I'm not sure if I was doing something wrong or what, but that didn't seem to have any effect on this PCAP here. Another tool out there, Zeek, which has kind of more behavioral analysis of a PCAP. That shows get dot dot slash etc password. So we're already seeing kind of stuff all over the place. And I also took a look at Snort to see what that would show. That's a tool basically very similar to Suricata. It actually uses the same rule set, so it was really easy to try that one. And looking through that documentation, the Stream 5 TCP, that's this kind of engine that processes and reassembles TCP. You can configure this. So you can say, this IP address is a Windows machine and reassembles TCP packets this way. Linux, this IP address on my network is a Linux server, and it's going to process these packets a different way. So we can actually configure Snort to reassemble TCP differently based on what operating system it is, if we know that information. Which got me to think, this probably isn't, new information. Like we mentioned earlier, TCP's been around since 1981. I thought it was pretty amazing we have operating systems doing this differently still today, but I looked into this and found, this isn't actually new information. IDSs can typically be configured to reassemble packets both ways. There was actually a great paper written in 1998 discussing all sorts of ways to elude network intrusion detection devices. There's actually a tool out there too that implements all these ways of overlapping fragments, sending data differently to do exactly this, to elude someone that's analyzing the network traffic. But is there anything new that maybe we could do in TCP reassembly here? I found another paper written in 2018, so a lot more recently, processing experimental protocols against IDSs. And that talked a little bit about using this method combined with TCP fast open, which is a new option in TCP, to see how different devices process the packets in that case. So let's take a look at that. So TCP fast open, it's typically abbreviated TFO for short. What this is intended to do is allow data in that initial SYN packet. So you remember our three-way handshake, we're trying to synchronize our sequence numbers, and there's no data sent in those initial 3 packets. So this is RFC 7413. This was processed in December 2014. This is something you can turn on in Linux. I'm not sure about Windows. I didn't have time to take a look into that. But in Linux, you can configure your server to support this. Clients will support it too. I think the Chrome web browser also does this. And it's really great, if you have a really long round trip time between these two devices. So if it takes a long time just for a packet to get there, sending data in that first one kind of can eliminate a lot of time. So it's great for something like a phone or a satellite, or even just a long physical distance. So how this works is we've got a client on the left and a server on the right. And as we do our three-way handshake with TCP fast open, the first time we connect, we're going to send our SYN packet and a TCP fast open request. And when the server receives this, we're not sending any data yet, just a request here. The server is going to generate a cookie, and in its SYN ACK packet, it's going to send that cookie to the client. The client's going to save that for now, send its ACK packet, and then we've completed the three-way handshake, and you've got kind of business as usual sending data. But if you connect to the server again, we've got the client and the server here. This is a client connecting to that same server that it just did in the previous example. We can send our initial SYN packet of the three-way handshake, that TCP fast open cookie that we got back from the server last time, and we can include data in this first packet. And the server can acknowledge that packet from the three-way handshake. And if it has data to send, it can start sending data immediately as well. It sure was fast. So let's take a look at some examples of this. So here's an example of the initial connection with TCP fast open enabled. So here we've got our first packet of the three-way handshake. So here we can see our SYN flag is set, indicating this is the first packet. And down in the options, we can actually see this TCP fast open option. And this is our TCP fast open cookie request. So in the second packet of the three-way handshake sent by the server, you can see our flags are set to SYN and ACK. And if we go down and look at the options again, here we can see the cookie that it's generated, that it's sending back to the client. And then from there, the three-way handshake completes as normal, and we can send some data. And if we take a look at the second time, we're connecting to this same server. Here we can see that, we can already see there's some data in here. We can see, what is that? We can see our TCP length is 75. And this is the first packet of the three-way handshake. So here we can see under the flags, our SYN flag is set. Under the options, we're including a TCP fast open option. And here we've got that same cookie that we sent last time, that the server sent to us in the last example. And so now we can start sending data. We can send our HTTP request immediately in this first packet. So the server can acknowledge that and then immediately start sending data back much faster than completing that whole three-way handshake. So how do tools handle things like TCP fast open? And is there anything interesting we can do with that? And there sure is. So here's a few examples I've got. I've got one, just sending some data, using SCAPI. We can send these packets that we're generating ourselves, so we don't have to send, what would normally happen. So here we've got some data in an initial SYN packet. So if we analyze this, we can take a look and see, all right, we've got our flag set to SYN. So this is the first packet. We've got some data here. We're trying to get an HTTP web page called OK to access. So to do that, we need to include a TCP fast open option and a cookie. And this cookie is not something that the server ever sent. So it actually, rejects this data. It still continues along with the three-way handshake. So it actually just doesn't include any of that data that was sent because the fast open cookie was bad. So it's just acknowledging one. It's acknowledging that it received a SYN packet, not any data. So if we take a look at something like follow stream in this case, follow stream doesn't actually know that the server rejected that data. So it thinks, all right, we sent that. Maybe it was processed. Maybe that's what the server received. Maybe it's not. It doesn't really know. So it's showing that in the TCP stream, even though that was never actually accepted by the server. So here's another example of this, kind of combined with that HTTP directory traversal example we had before. So here we're sending that first packet with our TCP fast open cookie. And we're sending get, and then this directory traversal. And the server's responding back with not found here. But if we look at what was sent in follow stream, here we can see kind of that, we're trying to get that directory up there. We're responding back with not found. Some other tools like follow HTTP will also show that. So we do have, a malicious attacker trying to exploit the server and get in this password file. The server isn't processing it in this case. This is with Nginx, not some Ruby program that I whipped up myself. So if we remember, threat assessment picks up on this and should alert us to the fact that a directory traversal attempt was attempted. But here we're just not seeing anything. So we don't see anything in threat assessment from Suricata about this alert where we did before. Let's take a look at one more example. This one's kind of combining, overlapping some of these fragments. So I called this fast open lap. And here what we've got is we've got our first packet of the three-way handshake. So we're saying, let's try to get this web page that's okay for us to access. We're going to send this with TCP fast open. So here's, again, this is the first packet in the three-way handshake. So without a TCP fast open cookie, there shouldn't be any data. So let's see, we've got a cookie, it looks like. Again, this is an invalid cookie, so not one that the server sent before. So if we look at what happens next, here we can see the server saying, okay, I got the first packet of the three-way handshake. I'll acknowledge that SYN flag and set my ACK number to 1, but I'm not acknowledging any of the data that you sent me. So the three-way handshake, just kind of goes on as normal. Here we complete it. And now we're going to retransmit that data we tried to send before with an invalid cookie. But let's retransmit it and say, let's get this web page called do not access instead. So not the web page that we requested before. And if we take a look at what the server sent, we've got a page here, you should not be here. So the server actually processed, this data of us saying, let me try to get this web page I'm not supposed to access. That's what the server processed and sent back in its response. But if we look at something like follow stream doesn't know that fast open cookie was bad. So it's actually assuming that data got there and is what was processed by the web server, even though right here we can see that that's actually not what happened. So there's another just interesting case that we can take a look at. A threat assessment wouldn't trigger on that. We take a look at follow HTTP, which is kind of looking at the HTTP streams too. Again, we can see, get okay to access. If we look at all these other tools, they're actually showing us not what the server really processed, but what was sent in some of the packets. And just again taking a look at just TCP in general with those other tools that we looked at before. So we've got network miner. It's going to show data that was sent in the fast open packet. TCP flow, at least the version I had, shows TCP protocol violation, SYN with data. It doesn't know anything about TCP fast open. And until then, you're not supposed to send data in a SYN packet, so it flags that as something that's not supposed to be sent. As we saw in the directory traversal example with TCP fast open, Suricata didn't alert on that. It doesn't show any data that's sent in a TCP fast open packet. It doesn't support it. There's actually an outstanding bug within Suricata. That should be, so there should be support for that coming in version 5, which should be out soon. But right now it won't alert on any data sent in a TCP fast open packet. Zeek will show data in a TCP fast open packet. And I didn't have a whole lot of time to play with Snort to look into this, but I couldn't get it to process any data that's sent in a TCP fast open packet. So all these tools out there that are supposed to be kind of alerting you to malicious traffic, this kind of just flies right under the radar for them. So after looking at all of that for my presentation and doing all that research, the whole point, don't trust your tools all the time. It's still really important to kind of know what's going on in the packets themselves and how these tools are, they're trying to make our lives as analysts easier, but there is information that they don't know. They don't know how every device under the sun is going to process TCP packets and how it's going to reassemble them. There's really no way to know from a PCAP that information. So you have to be aware, know what your tools are doing, dig a little deeper, just keep learning about networking protocols and how these packets work.
All right. Well, we'll leave it at that. The screen that I have up right now has some resources. That bit.ly link is the same. It goes to the same link that I just sent out in the chat. So you can either click on there to go to the collection or write that down. So we will make a video of this webinar so that you can watch it later. So you'll be able to catch these links. So like I said, Tom gave this talk at SharkFest 2019 US a couple weeks ago. And so if you want to catch the retrospective of all the other great talks that were given there, you can find it at that link there, SharkFest US. .wireshark.org/retrospective, and they have put up the 2019 one. It's already up there. And like I said, if you're looking to activate a CS Personal SaaS account or get a CS Enterprise demo, you can do that at cloudshark.io. And then if you go to our news or article section, you can sign up for our newsletter there, and you'll be able to get invitations to future webinars like this. So thank you all for joining, and we hope to see you next time.